Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to talk about chapters 20, 21, and 22. You're going to have to read that before you watch this video because Canvas is giving me a very hard time about making videos. So I'm going to just kind of give you a summary of important details. You're going to be writing a short answer response about the change in Misha's identity, which is extremely important in this section. So you're going to see that Misha, when we first met Misha, actually, before you open the pages in the book, he was a gypsy. He was somebody's child, he was somebody's brother, he was somebody's grandson, and he was a member of this gypsy family. And he wore that yellow necklace around his neck. Then, when we meet him, he has become Stop Thief, the person who steals bread from stores. And then after he meets Yuri, he becomes Misha Pilsudski. And now here we are in chapter 20, and his identity is going to change. And it's profound. So we're going to take a good look at that. At this point, one of the things the Gestapo would do is in the middle of the night, they would shout, make these comments in the middle of the street, and they would tell all the Jews to come down, and then they would march these people for hours and hours and hours in very, very poor conditions. Sometimes it would be freezing or snowing. And to keep in mind, these people did not have proper footwear. They didn't have warm clothing. They were starving. They were sick. And they would make them stand in place for hours and hours and hours. And sometimes they would just make them march around in a circle. And when somebody dropped or died, they would kind of kick them to the side, and they would do this kind of thing. So this happens to be the middle of the winter, so it's freezing, it's snowing out. They would taunt them. They would make these horrible remarks to them. They would put a gun in their face. There would be dogs there barking and threatening them. People were afraid. They would do this also in the summer when it was 90 degrees and very humid. They would make them stand for hours with no water. Of course, no bathroom facilities. It's not like they could raise their hand and ask to go to the bathroom. And this kind of thing went on all of the time. And I want you to notice that at this point, Misha, he recalls the stone angel. And he brings that to mind as he's standing in line. And that gives him a kind of strength and solace. Also, on page 95, this is a very important scene here where he starts to identify himself as a member of the Milgram family. Mr. Milgram gives Misha a white armband. He takes it out of a bag and he says, "I got this for you." And Misha puts it on his arm. It's the white armband with the blue Star of David. And then at the end of the chapter, he says to him, the scene on page 99. I dragged myself up the stairs with the Milgrams. Uncle Shepsel and Mrs. Milgram performed a groaning duet that grew louder with each step. I followed them into the room. I only wanted to sleep. I collapsed on the floor. When I awoke, I thought I was back in the courtyard under the blinding lights, but it was only the sun in the window, and Uncle Shepsel standing over, and he says, "Why is he sleeping here? He smells." And Mr. Milgram says, "I regret to inform you that you're not a rose garden yourself these days." And Uncle Shepsel says, "But he's not family." And this is where Mr. Milgram says, "He is now." So this is the beginning of the change, where he now is going to become Misha Milgram. So he goes from the gypsy to Stop Thief to Misha Pilsudski, and now he steps into Misha Milgram. We have to see what that is going to mean for him. In chapter 1, we see the presence of the dead bodies all over the place, and of course, the death of John. And they take John's shoes off of his feet, and they give the shoes to Big Henrik, the boy who doesn't speak. And we also see the presence of the flops, and then suddenly Yuri appears. And on page 102 and 103, Yuri appears. He says he saw a flash of red hair. Yuri appears, and he hits the flop over the head. And then they take the flop and they swing him, and they and they put him into the pile of the dead bodies. Okay, chapter 22, very important chapter, page 104. I want to talk a little bit about this. Here comes the big shot, said grim-faced Enos. The new Jew, said Kuba the clown. The family man, said Ferdy. His cigar flapped in his mouth as he spoke. The littlest Jew, said Enos. We're honored by your presence. He stood and bowed to me. Yuri smiled. So this is where Misha really steps into kind of a fuller measure of who he is now, as a Jew and as a smuggler. He says, I no longer slept all the time with the boys. Sometimes over Uncle Shepsel's objections, I slept at the Milgrams. So this is interesting. Yuri's transformation is taking place at the same time Misha's identity is changing. When I returned to sleep with the boys, they ribbed me. There were mountains of rubble to climb over to reach the braided rug. We slept on top of it now. It was spring. From the moment Mr. Milgram said he is now, my identity as a gypsy vanished. Okay, so this is really important because that is basically one of the things that the Jews wanted to do. They wanted to strip the Jews away from their Jewish identity. They wouldn't let them pray. They wouldn't let them go to their schools, their synagogues, and they took that identity away from them. And so this is kind of interesting that now Misha's identity as a gypsy has diminished, and now he becomes a Jew. Gone were the 7 wagons, 7 brothers, 5 sisters, Greta, the gray speckled mare. Deep down, I guess I had always known my gypsy identity was merely Yuri's story, not reality. I didn't miss it. I think this tells you that the need for love, the need to belong to a family, even if it is a family like the Milgrams where the mother and the uncle really don't appreciate him, it's still more important to him than anything else. When you own nothing, it's easy to let things go. I suppose my last name was Milgram now, so Pilsudski went too. I kept Misha. I liked it. So page 104, 105, very important. This is where he becomes Misha Milgram. And if he becomes Misha Milgram, then Janina is his sister and Mr. Milgram is his father. He says, I kept something else too, the yellow stone around my neck. The yellow stone my father had given me. I knew. Something in me had always known that this was the one true part of Yuri's story. So he holds on to that. And then the other important part of this is that he says, we were night people now. We were all smugglers now, even Big Henrik. Smuggling was a nighttime thing. There was a curfew in the ghetto. And what these kids would do is after curfew, when it was, very dark outside, they would prowl around the brick wall, and they would go to places where they knew there were holes in the walls, and they would shimmy through the walls, and they would go to the other side, or they would go through these underground passageways. And of course, these places were heavily patrolled. The other important part of this section is the presence of Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, and that there's this talk that Himmler's coming to the ghetto. And this is very important. So Himmler, Heinrich Himmler he was a leading member of the Nazi Party. He was often regarded as the most powerful man next to Hitler. And he was more or less in charge of the Warsaw Ghetto. So he's going to come to the Warsaw Ghetto to see that, that the Jews are being killed and how they're being treated and starved and all that, and make sure that all of this is going on. Okay, so I'm going to leave you now. And in this section, you're going to write about the transformation of Misha, the gypsy boy who became stop thief, who became Misha Pilsudski, and now he has stepped into Misha Milgram, the Jewish boy. Okay.